History of the Central African Republic. Published December the 9th, 2017. Special characters are denoted as follows. And. Left and right parentheses. The history of the Central African Republic is roughly composed of 4 distinct periods. The earliest period of settlement began around 10,000 years ago when nomadic people first began to settle, farm and fish in the region. The next period began around 1,000 to 3,000 years ago when several non-indigenous groups began to migrate into the region from other parts of the continent. The third period involved the colonial conquest and rule of the country by France and Germany, which spanned from the late 1800s until 1960 when the Central African Republic became an independent state. The final period has been the era during which the Central African Republic has been an independent state. Part 1. Early History. Approximately 10,000 years ago, desertification forced hunter-gatherer societies south into the Sahel regions of northern Central Africa, where some groups settled and began farming as part of the Neolithic Revolution. Initial farming of white yam progressed into militant sorghum, and then later the domestication of African oil palm improved the group's nutrition and allowed for expansion of the local populations. Bananas arrived in the region and added an important source of carbohydrates to the diet. They were also used in the production of alcohol. When this agricultural revolution, combined with a fish stew revolution, in which fishing began to take place, and the use of boats, allowed for the transportation of goods. Products were often moved in ceramic pots, which are the first known examples of artistic expression from the region's inhabitants. The megaliths in the western region of the country indicate an advanced level of habitation dating back to the very late Neolithic era. c. 3500 to 2700 BC. Ironworking arrived in the region around 1000 BC from both Bantu cultures in what is today Nigeria and from the Nile city of Meroe, the capital of the Kingdom of Kush. During the Bantu migrations from about 1000 BC to AD 1000, Ubangi-speaking people spread eastward from Cameroon to Sudan. Bantu-speaking people settled in the southwestern regions of the CFA. And Central Sudanic-speaking people settled along the Ubangi River in what is today Central and East CFA. Citation needed. Production of copper, salt, dried fish, and textiles dominated the economic trade in the Central African region. The territory of modern Central African Republic is known to have been settled from at least the 7th century on by overlapping empires, including the Kanem-Bornu, Uadi, Bagayami, and Darfur groups based on the Lake Chad region and along the Upper Nile. Part 2. 16th to the 19th century. During the 16th and 17th centuries, Muslim slave traders began to raid the region and their captives were shipped to the Mediterranean coast, Europe, Arabia, the Western Hemisphere, or to the slave ports and factories along the West African coast. The Ubangi people became major slave traders and sold their captives to the Americas using the Ubangi River to reach the coast. During the 18th century, Bandi and Zakari peoples established the Bangui kingdom along the Ubangi River. Population migration in the 18th and 19th centuries brought new migrants into the area, including the Azande, Banda, and Baya. Citation needed. Part 3. Colonial to decolonization. Part 3. Colonial to decolonization. Chapter 1. French colony. 1894 to 1940. In 1875, the Sudanese Sultan Rabi Az-Zubair governed Upper Bangui, which included present-day CFA. Europeans, primarily the French, German, and Belgians, arrived in the area in 1885. The French consolidated their legal claim to the area through an 1887 convention with Congo Free State, which granted France possession of the right bank of the Ubangi River. 2 years later, the French established an outpost at Bangui, and in 1894, Ubangi Shari became a French territory. However, the French did not consolidate their control over the area until 1903, after having defeated the forces of Rabi in the Battle of Coup and established colonial administration throughout the territory. In 1906, the Ubangi Shari territory was united with the Chad colony. In 1910, it became one of the 4 territories of the Federation of French Equatorial Africa, EF. Along with Chad, Middle Congo, and Gabon, the next 30 years were marked by mostly small-scale revolts against French rule and the development of a plantation-style economy. The largest of these revolts was the Congo War Rebellion, when over 350,000 natives rebelled against the colonial administration. The European penetration of Central African territory began in the late 19th century during the Scramble for Africa. Count Savignan de Brazza established the French Congo and sent expeditions up the Ubangi River from Brazzaville in an effort to expand France's claims to territory in Central Africa. Belgium, Germany, and the United Kingdom also competed to establish their claims to territory in the region. In 1889, the French established a post on the Ubangi River at Bangui. In 1890–91, de Brazza sent expeditions up the Sangha River, in what is now southwestern Sierra, up the center of the Ubangi Basin toward Lake Chad, and eastward along the Ubangi River toward the Nile, with the intention of expanding the borders of the French Congo to link up the other French territories in Africa. In 1894, the French Congo's borders with Leopold II of Belgium's Congo Free State and German Cameroon were fixed by diplomatic agreements. In 1899, the French Congo's border with Sudan was fixed along the Congo-Nile divide. This situation left France without a much-coveted outlet on the Nile. Once European negotiators had agreed upon the borders of the French Congo, France had to decide how to pay for the costly occupation, administration, and development of the territory it had acquired. The reported financial successes of Leopold II's concessionary companies in the Congo Free State convinced the French government to grant 17 private companies large concessions in the Ubangi Shari region in 1899. In return for the right to exploit these lands by buying local products and selling European goods, the companies promised to pay rent to France and to promote the development of their concessions. The companies employed European and African agents who frequently used brutal methods to force the natives to labor. At the same time, the French colonial administration began to force the local population to pay taxes and to provide the state with free labor. The companies and the French administration at times collaborated in forcing the Central Africans to work for them. Some French officials who reported abuses committed by private company militias and their own colonial colleagues and troops, but efforts to hold these people accountable almost invariably failed. When any news of atrocities committed against Central Africans reached France and caused an outcry, investigations were undertaken and some feeble attempts at reform were made. By whom? But the situation on the ground in Ubangi Shari remained virtually unchanged. Citation needed. During the first decade of French colonial rule, from about 1900 to 1910, the rulers of the Ubangi Shari region increased both their slave-raiding activities and the selling of local produce to Europe. They took advantage of their treaties with the French to procure more weapons, which were used to capture more slaves. Much of the eastern half of Ubangi Shari was depopulated as a result of slave trading by local rulers during the first decade of colonial rule. After the power of local African rulers was destroyed by the French, slave raiding greatly diminished. Citation needed. In 1911, the Sangha and Lobe basins were ceded to Germany as part of an agreement which gave France a free hand in Morocco. Western Ubangi Shari remained under German rule until World War I, after which France again annexed the territory using Central African troops. From 1920 to 1930, a network of roads was built, cash crops were promoted and mobile health services were formed to combat sleeping sickness. Protestant missions were established in different parts of the country. New forms of forced labor were also introduced. However, as the French conscripted large numbers of Ubangians to work on the Congo Ocean Railway, many of these recruits died of exhaustion and illness as a result of the poor conditions. In 1925, the French writer André Gide published Voyage au Congo, in which he described the alarming consequences of conscription for the Congo Ocean Railroad. He exposed the continuing atrocities committed against Central Africans in western Ubangi Shari by such employers as the Forestry Company of Sangha Ubangi. In 1928, a major insurrection, the Congo War Rebellion or War of the Hohandle, broke out in western Ubangi Shari and continued for several years. The extent of this insurrection, which was perhaps the largest anti-colonial rebellion in Africa during the interwar years, was carefully hidden from the French public because it provided evidence of strong opposition to French colonial rule and forced labor. During the 1930s, cotton, tea, and coffee emerged as important cash crops in Ubangi Shari, and the mining of diamonds and gold began in earnest. Several cotton companies were granted purchasing monopolies over large areas of cotton production and were able to fix the prices paid to cultivators, which assured profits for their shareholders. In September 1940, during the Second World War, pro-Gaullist French officers took control of Ubangi Shari. Part 3, Colonial to Decolonization. Chapter 2, Decolonization. 1940 to 1960. In August 1940, the territory responded, with the rest of the EF, to the call from General Charles de Gaulle to fight for free France. After World War II, the French Constitution of 1946 inaugurated the first of a series of reforms that led eventually to complete independence for all French territories in Western and Equatorial Africa. In 1946, all EF inhabitants were granted French citizenship and allowed to establish local assemblies. The assembly NCR was led by Barthélemy Boganda, a Catholic priest who also was known for his forthright statements in the French Assembly on the need for African emancipation. In 1956, French legislation eliminated certain voting inequalities and provided for the creation of some organs of self-government in each territory. The French constitutional referendum of September 1958 dissolved the EF, and on the 1st of December of the same year the Assembly declared the birth of the autonomous Central African Republic with Boganda as head of government. Boganda ruled until his death in a plane crash on the 29th of March 1959. His cousin, David Dacko, replaced him as head of government. On the 12th of July 1960, France agreed to the Central African Republic becoming fully independent. On the 13th of August 1960, the Central African Republic became an independent country and David Dacko became its first president. Part 4, Independence. Part 4, Independence. Chapter 1, Bokassa Coup. On the 1st of January 1966, following a swift and almost bloodless overnight coup, Colonel Jean Bédel Bokassa assumed power as President of the Republic. Bokassa abolished the Constitution of 1959, dissolved the National Assembly, and issued a decree that placed all legislative and executive powers in the hands of the President. On the 4th of December 1976, the Republic became a monarchy, the Central African Empire, with the promulgation of the Imperial Constitution and the proclamation of the President as Emperor Bokassa I. His regime was characterized by numerous human rights atrocities. After his overthrow, Bokassa returned unexpectedly in October 1986, and on the 12th of June 1987, he was convicted of having ordered the murders of at least 20 prisoners and the arrest of the school children who were murdered. He was sentenced to death, but this was commuted to a life term in February 1988. He was released from prison on the 1st of September 1993 as a result of an amnesty and died of a heart attack in Bangui on the 3rd of November 1996 at age 75. Part 4, Independence. Chapter 2, Dako Counter-Coup. On the 20th of September 1979, Dako, with French support, led a bloodless coup that overthrew Bokassa while he was out of the country. The Republic was restored, and Bokassa, who took refuge in Ivory Coast and France, was sentenced to death in absentia for various crimes, including cannibalism. Moreover, an African Judicial Commission reported that he had almost certainly taken part in the massacre of some 100 children for refusing to wear the compulsory school uniforms. In January 1981, 6 of his supporters, including 2 sons-in-law, were executed. Part 4, Independence. Chapter 3, Coaling Bass Coup and Rule. Dako's efforts to promote economic and political reforms proved ineffectual, and on the 20th of September 1981, he in turn was overthrown in a bloodless coup by General André Kolingba. For 4 years, Kolingba led the country as head of the Military Committee for National Recovery. CRMN. Kolingba suspended the constitution and ruled with a military junta until 1985. In 1985, the CRMN was dissolved, and Kolingba named a new cabinet with increased civilian participation, signaling the start of a return to civilian rule. The process of democratization quickened in 1986 with the creation of a new political party, the Rassemblement Démocratique Centrafricaine (RDC), and the drafting of a new constitution that subsequently was ratified in a national referendum. General Kolingba was sworn in as constitutional president on the 29th of November 1986. The constitution established a National Assembly made up of 52 elected deputies, elected in July 1987, and municipal elections were held in 1988. Kolingba's 2 major political opponents, Abel Goumba and Angel Felix Patas, boycotted these elections because their parties were not allowed to participate. Citation needed. Part 4, Independence. Chapter 4, Pro-Democracy Movement. By 1990, inspired by the fall of the Berlin Wall, a pro-democracy movement became very active. In May 1990, a letter signed by 253 prominent citizens asked for the convocation of a national conference, but Kolingba refused this request and instead detained several opponents. Pressure from the United States, France, and from a group of locally represented countries and agencies called GIBF, France, the USA, Germany, Japan, the EU, the World Bank, and the UN, finally led Kolingba to agree, in principle, to hold free elections in October 1992 with help from the UN Office of Electoral Affairs. After using the excuse of alleged irregularities to suspend the results of the elections as a pretext for holding on to power, President Kolingba came under intense pressure from GIBFOR to establish a Conseil National Politique Provisoire de la République, Provisional National Political Council, CNPPR, and to set up a mixed electoral commission, which included representatives from all political parties. When elections were finally held in 1993, again with the help of the international community, Angel Felix Patas led in the first round and Kolingba came in fourth behind Abel Goumba and David Dako. In the second round, Patas won 53% of the vote while Goumba won 45.6%. Most of Patas's support came from Baya, Shari, and Kaba voters in 7 heavily populated prefectures in the northwest, while Goumba's support came largely from 10 less populated prefectures in the south and east. Furthermore, the Patas's party, the Mouvement pour la Libération du Peuple Centrafricain, MLPC, or Movement for the Liberation of the Central African People, gained a simple but not an absolute majority of seats in parliament, which meant Partis's party required coalition partners. Chapter 4, Pro-Democracy Movement. Section 1, Patas Government. 1993 to 2003. This entire article contains 0 references. Patas relieved former President Kolingba of his military rank of general in March 1994 and then charged several former ministers with various crimes. Patas also removed many Yukoma from important, lucrative posts in the government. 200 predominantly Yukoma members of the Presidential Guard were also dismissed or reassigned to the army. Kolingba's RDC loudly proclaimed that Partis's government was conducting a witch hunt against the Yukoma. A new constitution was approved on the 28th of December 1994 and promulgated on the 14th of January 1995, but this constitution, like those before it, did not have much impact on the country's politics. In 1996 to 1997, reflecting steadily decreasing public confidence in the government's erratic behavior, 3 mutinies against Partis's administration were accompanied by widespread destruction of property and heightened ethnic tension. On the 25th of January 1997, the Bangui Agreements, which provided for the deployment of an inter-African military mission, the Mission Inter-Africaine de Surveillance des Accords de Bangui, MISAB, were signed. Mali's former president, Amadou Touré, served as chief mediator and brokered the entry of ex-mutineers into the government on the 7th of April 1997. The MISAB mission was later replaced by a UN peacekeeping force, the Mission des Nations Unies NRCA, MINURCA. In 1998, parliamentary elections resulted in Kolingba's RDC winning 20 out of 109 seats, constituting a comeback. However, in 1999, in spite of widespread public anger in urban centers over his corrupt rule, Patas won free elections to become president for a second term. On the 28th of May 2001, rebels stormed strategic buildings in Bangui in an unsuccessful coup attempt. The Army Chief of Staff, Abel Abreu, and General Francois Njadabediya were killed, but Patas regained the upper hand by bringing in at least 300 troops of the rebel leader Jean-Pierre Bemba from across the river in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, and by Libyan soldiers. Citation needed. In the aftermath of the failed coup, militias loyal to Patas sought revenge against rebels in many neighborhoods of the capital, Bangui, and incited unrest which resulted in the destruction of many homes as well as the torture and murder of many opponents. Eventually, Patas came to suspect that General Francois Bozizé was involved in another coup attempt against him, which led Bozizé to flee with loyal troops to Chad. In March 2003, Bozizé launched a surprise attack against Patas, who was out of the country. Libyan troops and some 1,000 soldiers of Bemba's Congolese rebel organization failed to stop the rebels, who took control of the country and thus succeeded in overthrowing Patas. Citation needed. Part 4, Independence. Chapter 5, Bozizé's Coup and Rule. On the 15th of March 2003, while Patas was abroad, rebels moved into Bangui and installed their commander, General Francois Bozizé, as president. Bozizé has since been elected president in an election considered by observers to be fair and free. Patas has been found guilty of major crimes in Bangui and CFA has brought a case to the International Criminal Court against him and Jean-Pierre Bemba from the neighboring Democratic Republic of Congo, accusing them both of multiple crimes in suppressing one of the mutinies against Patas. Civil tranquility has yet to be established and parts of the country remain out of government control. The UN continues to maintain a peace-building mission in Bangui. Despite these shortcomings, and his promise to step down at the end of the transition, Bozais contested the 13th of March 2005 presidential elections in which all of the leading opposition candidates were allowed to run except for Patas. Bozais won on the second runoff round on the 8th of May 2005, defeating Martin Ziegler, who ran on the ticket of the MLPC, the former ruling party. The National Elections Commission declared Bozais the winner with 64.6% of the vote to 35.4% for Ziegler. The election was generally considered to be fair, although the absence of Patas cast a shadow over the legitimacy of the process. After Bozais seized power in 2003, the Central African Republic Bush War began with the rebellion by the Union of Democratic Forces for Unity, UFDR, led by Michel Djitodia. This quickly escalated into major fighting during 2004. The UFDR rebel forces consisted of three allies: the Groupe d'Action Patriotique pour la Libération de Centrafrique, GIA plc, the Convention of Patriots for Justice and Peace, CPJP, the People's Army for the Restoration of Democracy, APRD, the Movement of Central African Liberators for Justice, MLCJ, and the Front Démocratique Centrafricaine, FDC. On the 8th of May 2005, Bozais gained yet a further victory when his coalition, Convergence Quinaqua, won 42 parliamentary seats in the legislative runoff vote. The MLPC came in second with 11 seats while the RDC won only 8 seats. The remaining seats were won by independents or by smaller parties. In June later that year, the African Union, AU, lifted sanctions against the country, which had been applied after the 2003 coup. In early 2006, Bozais' government appeared stable. However, Patas, who was living in exile in Togo, could not be ruled out as a leader of a future uprising. His supporters reportedly were joining or were prepared to join rebel movements in belief that their leader was still the rightful head of state of the country. Further, members of Koling Bass Yakoma tribe in the south posed a potential threat to Bozais' government because of their widespread boycott of the second round of the legislative elections. Members of the Yakoma dominate the army. On the 13th of April 2007, a peace agreement between the government and the UFDR was signed in Birao. The agreement provided for an amnesty for the UFDR, its recognition as a political party, and the integration of its fighters into the army. Further negotiations resulted in an agreement in 2008 for reconciliation, a unity government, and local elections in 2009 and parliamentary and presidential elections in 2010. The new unity government that resulted was formed in January 2009. Part 4, Independence. Chapter 6, Selika Coup. In late 2012, a coalition of old rebel groups under new name of Selika renewed fighting. Two other, previously unknown groups, the Alliance for Revival and Rebuilding, ATUA, and the Patriotic Convention for Saving the Country, CPSK, also joined the coalition, as well as the Chadian group FPR. On the 27th of December 2012, CFA President François Bozais requested international assistance to help with the rebellion, in particular from France and the United States. French President François Hollande rejected the plea, saying that the 250 French troops stationed at Bangui Mboko International Airport are there in no way to intervene in the internal affairs. On the 11th of January 2013, a ceasefire agreement was signed at Libreville, Gabon. The rebels dropped their demand for President François Bozais to resign, but he had to appoint a new prime minister from the opposition party by the 18th of January 2013. On the 13th of January, Bozais signed a decree that removed Prime Minister Faustin Archange Touadéra from power, as part of the agreement with the rebel coalition. On the 17th of January, Nicolas Diangué was appointed Prime Minister. On the 24th of March 2013, rebel forces heavily attacked the capital Bangui and took control of major structures, including the presidential palace. Bozizé's family fled across the river to the Democratic Republic of the Congo and then to Yaoundé, the capital of Cameroon, where he has been granted temporary refuge. Selika leader Michel Djotodia declared himself president. Djotodia said that there would be a 3-year transitional period and that Tiange would continue to serve as prime minister. Djotodia promptly suspended the constitution and dissolved the government, as well as the National Assembly. He then reappointed Tiange as prime minister on the 27th of March 2013. Top military and police officers met with Djotodia and recognized him as president on the 28th of March 2013. Catherine Samba-Panza assumed the office of interim president on the 23rd of January 2014. This recording is a derivative work from Wikipedia. For more information, please visit www.frogcast.org.